Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of CoinNewsExtra interview. It's a program where we have the decision makers, innovators in the blockchain and crypto and fintech space who come talk about the project, talk about matters arising and things around blockchain and cryptocurrency and fintech. So today we'll be taking a discussion around the regulatory sandbox. So we have the CEO of MTech. She is Carmelle Cadet. Carmelle, you're welcome to CoinNewsExtra.
Thank you, Lee. It's always good to chat with you. Congratulations on all the good progress that you're having. But excited to talk to you about what's going on in fintech.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's our pleasure to have you, and we are so excited about what you are doing around this ecosystem with MTech. So, we want to know briefly how things are happening, especially we've been hearing about the sandbox and all the rest of them. But before we go into that, we'd just like to know a brief about you.
Sure. So I'm the founder and CEO of MTech, which is a technology company essentially building modern software for central banks and helping them not only become more innovative, but also address financial inclusion using blockchain technology, AI and machine learning. We're building new tools and modern software, dashboards, platforms, and tools for central banks to be able to have the same technology that we can use for Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, and to make it widely available, just like cash is today. So we see a really good opportunity to work with central banks. And, we don't wake up every day thinking about our central banks, but they can make or break, how innovative our ecosystem can be and how fast we actually progress to adopt new technology. And they've been struggling to do that. So the opportunity to work with them, and it's a different approach to addressing financial inclusion for us, right? A lot of times you hear about solutions and apps that try to address that, and that address that in many areas that are absolutely crucial. But the cost of payments and the ecosystem itself still had a lot of friction, still has. So that's why you see the rise of Bitcoins. That's why you see the rise of cryptocurrencies. But the infrastructure at the very core of it is something that still needs to be modernize and transform to catch up with everything else. So we're helping them do that.
Interesting what you're doing around CBDC. And when we talk about regulatory sandbox, so there are some questions around it. People having issues to understanding what sandbox is. So we want to take a deep dive and see what a regulatory sandbox is and why is it becoming popular these days.
Yeah. It's becoming a catch-all word when it comes to either the pain that fintechs go through, and it comes to collaborating with regulators, or at least a way to engage a regulator when you're doing something new, right? But that concept, started a few years back, especially with the UK and Singapore really kind of launching the concept, and even in the US agency launching the concept of a sandbox to have a channel to work with innovators in a particular sector and learn, assess risk, and whenever possible, ideally being able to learn from that interaction and adjust, regulation and make sure it's focusing more on risk management than technology, because a lot of times we see regulators kind of, or we talk to them about blockchain. Technically, it should not be about the technology. Technically, it should be about the risks that a particular solution presents for the market. So when we think about Sandbox, I talk about, for me, after when I started in MTech, going around and talking to central bankers, I was starting with central bank digital currencies, but quickly realized that there was a lot of work that needed to be done in order for them to even start thinking about what CBDC means and how do they go about implementing it. Because you can imagine if we take for granted the system and the infrastructure that cash is today, meaning that you always have, you know, a backup. Worst case scenario, you will always have something to go back to, right? And that is something that people get a lot of value from, and we have to make sure that however we're transforming it, it is done in a way that is not only stable, that doesn't end up excluding people, right? So when we think about Sandbox, the opportunity is also around how do we diversify access to innovators? How do we make sure that it's not only whoever can pay, big fees for certifications that get through a Sandbox? How do you provide an innovation platform for innovators to come and collaborate with a regulator and make sure they have the right guidance and the right compliance in place and the right tools in place to make sure they're not losing people's, consumer data, they're not violating and stealing people's data. And if it's not supposed to be shared, if the consumer does not want their data to be shared, how do you prevent and make sure that they're not doing that? So those are certain things that we're looking at. But at the same time, the process of Sandbox today, the way people do Sandbox today, it's via email, and or you bring physical paper. You go to the central bank and you meet with them directly. And of course, even pre-COVID, everybody knew that that's something that needed to be digitized because it takes a long time. That's why on average, a fintech spends between 9 months and to a year in a Sandbox, environment, because sometimes regulatory reviews and they take a long time to kind of understand what the technology is doing. You don't particularly have all the information in one place, and regulators are making decisions. And you're not even touching on the fact that whether you need more regulators, more than one regulator to get approval for something, right? So it becomes really cumbersome as a process in the fintech and innovation ecosystem, right? That's kind of something that's been blocking and really stopping innovators from even getting in the game. So that's what we're thinking about when it comes to Sandbox.
Interesting. We know the ecosystem is quite new, and there are some regulations around it which people don't really understand. Even some of the regulators, they don't really understand CBDC, the sandbox, and everything. So going around the ecosystem. So this is also hindering innovations and people who want to make impact in this sector. So we're going to talk about innovations around these regulations. How are they going? When you were mentioning it, you made mention briefly about regulations. It differs from different territories, different regions. So how is it? Are there some gaps in innovation and regulations?
Yeah, one of the exercises, one of our advisors, is really big on when it comes to process mapping and policy mapping. So one of the first things that we did when we started MTech is get an advisor who understood central banking, who could put the regulator hat on, so we could understand our customer better, right? And having that view, so we find ourselves kind of in push and pull relationship when we're designing the product, when we're designing the solution is, okay, as a regulator, you want access to data and you want to understand how can we give you that information that helps you make a decision faster? That's really the question, right? How can we get you the information that helps you to make a decision faster?
Yes.
So capturing and working with the fintechs and providing a way that so many other things, like a digital form that you go online and submit it, and being able to have and match that to regulatory guidelines into policies, using machine learning, using AI, using data analytics, how can we help that process be digital, be more analytical, be more transparent, and of course, much faster.
Justin, we've been able to understand what a regulatory sandbox is and why it's becoming popular. We've been able to see some of the gaps because of different regions and different regulations from different governments. So you are the founder and CEO of NTech. NTech, what problem is it trying to solve? Let me say from the fintech perspective.
From the fintech perspective,
Yes.
working with the regulator, they're modernizing their technology to make it easier for fintech to enter and connect into the infrastructure. We want to take a centralized system that is, you have a centralized body, an institution that plays a role in the ecosystem, right? FinTech is speaking. How can we bridge that gap is one thing that we need to do. But also by making the system more compatible, that currency system more compatible to the fintech technology, now you make it easier. You reduce the cost of compliance. You reduce the cost of integration for players who want to provide mobile money, mobile credit, microloans, trade finance, cross-border payments, remittance services. Those services become more efficient and less costly than it is today if the central bank and the infrastructure itself is more efficient. And we see blockchain as a unique technology that allows them to do that in a controlled manner, but also allows for the distributed ledger, for the distributed network model to really still connect, even for a centralized issued token. And I say this sometimes, every network is centralized somewhere. Every network is. Bitcoin is centralized. The computer made a decision, the smart contract, not smart contract, but the programming and the number of Bitcoins that was actually created is fixed. Someone made a decision on that, and there's nothing we can do. If you want to change it, you can fork it and do something else, but you're not changing Bitcoin, right? So every network is centralized in one way. Is how do you make it? How do you ensure that you build a system that is also accessible to everyone else? That's the focus for us.
Interesting. What does MTech, well, the activities of MTech, how is it related to central bank and CBDC when it comes to ease of innovation?
Yeah, so we call our kind of a one-liner is like we're fintech for central banks, right? There's more to CBDC than just a token. There is the blockchain governance itself, which is very important, but there's also the governance of the network, the governance of the transactions, and how do you provide privacy to users, right? That's something that people talk about all the time. I hear it. It's like, well, people are not going to have privacy on CBDC. I say, until we do. Right? And that's something that, I think we should know enough to never say never anymore when it comes to innovation in this space, right? The same way solar panel was very expensive until it wasn't, right? So we have seen the cycles of innovation. Of course, you're at a place where you're looking at high payment fees, or for Ethereum, you're looking at high payment fees for, Bitcoin sometimes, but you also see, a roadmap that Veteran shared with us, right? A roadmap of how they're going to scale the network. It's a journey. And I think looking at that, we say, yes, you see central bank digital currency in this, but the central banks as an institution, if we're going to make CBDC as democratized, as decentralized as we can when it comes to usability and access, they need new tools. They need new platforms. They need new engagement tools when it comes to interoperability, integrating. Central banks today don't have APIs. A lot of them don't have public APIs that they would make available for fintechs to connect. You have to be a bank, and you go through a long list of requirements, and you have to have that much of capital to get in. You have to it's a high barrier of entry. But because of that, there's also a concentration and a limitation for fintechs to get closer to that efficiency, right? And that's what we're working on. And I think what you're going to see and what as an infrastructure, which we've been talking about for a long time, right? It's not just an asset. It's about the app that supports the CBDC. It's about the security, the API endpoints, the API gateways that are going to service CBDC, that are going to allow the exchanges to hold CBDC and then exchange CBDC for Bitcoin. You're going to see a big influx, and I think you're seeing it already, the same way you're seeing Bitcoin getting into balance sheets and more corporate treasuries. You're going to see CBDC also taking place and making its way to different channels.
Yeah, I want to ask you this question. You are into CBDC and you are trying to find a way to help the central bankers get their way into the CBDC. So, well, don't you think regulations, most governments are not that, their regulations are not friendly? We've seen the likes of even Nigeria recently released regulatory guidelines on digital assets, cryptocurrencies, and everything. So, how are you seeing regulations hindering innovations in this sector?
Yeah, really good question, because I think it was 2 days before the OCC in the US came out with a different rule compared to the SEC in Nigeria came out. And essentially the SEC, and correct me if I'm wrong, the SEC in Nigeria essentially said any crypto asset is a security unless you tell us that it's not, right? Until you prove us that it's not. Essentially,
Yes.
that was the writing. And then the US then moved a little bit further to say, we understand that there are securities and then there are assets, that we are going to look at every one of them and determine what's an asset and what's a security, right? Different ways of saying the same thing might end up with a different result, but essentially what you have is a regulator who doesn't clearly know, who's seeing a lot of options thrown at them when it comes to tokens, and they don't have a way to process it yet, right? They have to go one by one. Imagine if you actually pre-coded and said, if your application is doing X, then it's a security and you get this kind of approval, and here automatically the different regulators that you need to go apply for, and then here are the forms all in one place, and you fill it out and you can get your, at least a standardization process, right, of what you're supposed to do for securities versus what you're supposed to do if you actually meet certain criteria. This is an asset and you follow a different path. That OCC decision is something that in my old job, that we actually had a product that was waiting on a regulatory decision that was exactly that. Is it a security or is it an asset? It took 2 years. It took 2 years, right, for the regulator to come out and say what we knew that needed to be said. It's like there are securities. And I remember that we were literally writing makes it an asset, right? And we structured and designed the solution that way. It kills innovation. It kills innovation. You have a product that had millions of dollars invested in it. So you had investors not particularly understanding what the regulatory landscape was going to be. They invested $20 million into something Or even if you're a startup or a VC, you're investing $2 million into a startup to go get regulatory approval. You don't know if you're going to come out with a result, fast enough that the investor is willing to wait. So those are, this is impacting so many different things when it comes to the time and the difficulty that the regulators are dealing with when it comes to understanding emerging tech. And we want to be able to do that in two ways when it comes to the sandbox. We want, we see the efficiency and the opportunity and having not only the fintech come onto the platform to, test out their apps and get regulatory approval as they need to and find, pre-configured templates, the forms that they need, that they don't need to go read, the laws for them to understand what they're supposed to be doing. There's a way to really simplify that process for fintechs and for them to be able to get to that process without needing a law degree.
So finally, before we draw the curtain on today's episode of CoinNewsExtra interview, what's your take on CBDC? How do you see the future of CBDC?
Well, I'm thinking about when I first, came to Africa to talk about CBDC. And that was, I was there in 2018 talking about blockchain. And, I was almost laughed out of the room. It's like, that's never going to happen. It's like, nope, not going to happen. We don't know what this is. That's not going. And then, fast forward to today where Nigeria is having such a high volume of Bitcoin transactions, right? That really shows you, and I think people lose a sense of that sometimes because we're so in it day to day. It's like things are not happening fast enough when you're in it day to day. But that's been less than 2 years. And I left, IBM in the middle of a conversation around whether central banks should, adopt CBDCs. Should they do that? And there were many plus and minuses and many yes and no's. But as of last week, you have the European Central Bank, right? The chair of the European Central Bank coming out saying, not only, having such a focus, right, on digital cash. I'm really big on use cases because we've talked about CBDC and big picture for so long. Digital cash is a very unique use case when it comes to CBDC that is very decentralizing as a mechanism, but at the same time that reinforces, right? It makes the market more resilient and more structured to have a compatible technology to run on. And I know people say, well, should Africa do CBDC? Not everybody needs CBDC. It's not about it's. I think people say that when you think about a token and whether you should, change cash. It's not about that, right? It's about the fact that you have an economy, you have everybody around you adopting cell phones. and then you say, no, I don't want a cell phone. I'll just, I'll send you a letter. I'll mail you a letter. And everybody's texting each other, and then you want to send a mail, right? So that's where we are. The reality and the benefits are becoming clearer. The way to apply it and the way to integrate with the current system and then look to the future is becoming a bit clearer. My big thing that I tell innovators and fintech and players in this space is everybody should be thinking about how do they attach their product to support CBDC as well. If you want to take payment in Bitcoins, take payment in Bitcoins. But if you're going to take only Bitcoin payments, you're going to exclude so many other people that are not into Bitcoin, that don't even know what Bitcoin is and don't care, right? And cash is the most used, and it's the riskless asset, and people just want to buy food. And I think you're going to see, for at least the foreseeable future, the overwhelming use of regular money compared to crypto, right? Sometimes we get into our own little bubble and we think that everybody is walking down the street paying in crypto. They're not. People are buying crypto and holding it or trading it, right? It's virtual for the most part. The retail adoption is not there yet, and sometimes I wonder if it will be because of the fluctuation, right? It's very hard to do commerce in such a high fluctuation. So that's what I tell people, because I think that's going to make the adoption. Of course, it's going to help the adoption, but it delivers on the inclusion role of it. If people don't support it, then they end up excluding everybody else.
Interesting. We know what CBDC because properly the 21st century when it comes to payment and the way money is being done and handled, because things are changing. We could know when you trace down the history of money,
Right.
the different processes that it has gone through. I believe with the CBDC, there is a great future because of many things. If you take businesses, it's going to be easier for remittances. And even when people talk about, there have been talks around CBDC about when it comes to cryptocurrency about financing terrorism and money laundering and all the rest of them. We believe that with CBDC, there's more transparency when it comes to the nation's economy and money movement. So thank you very
Yeah.
much, Carmelle Cadet, for throwing more light on this insightful, eye-opener talk speech and interview. We really appreciate what you are doing with NTech in this sector. Thank you very much for joining us today, Carmelle Cadet.
Thank you, Lee. All right. Take care.